Israel-Palestine conflict. How did it started? It's a 100-year-old issue. Britain took control of the area known as Palestine. After the ruler of that part of Middle East, the Ottoman Empire, was defeated in World War I. The land was inhabited by a Jewish minority and Arab majority. Tensions between two people grew when the international community gave Britain the task of establishing a national home in Palestine for Jewish people. For Jews, it was their ancestral home. But Palestinian Arabs also claimed the land and opposed the move. Between 1920s and 40s, the number of Jews arriving there grew, with many fleeing from persecution in the Europe and seeking a homeland after the Holocaust of World War. Violence between Jews and Arabs and against British rule also grew. In 1947, the UN voted for Palestine to be split into separate Jewish and Arab states, with Jerusalem becoming an international city. That plan was accepted by Jewish leaders but rejected by Arab side and never implemented. The creation of Israel and Catastrophe. In 1948, unable to solve the problem, British rulers left and Jewish leaders declared the creation of State of Israel. Many Palestinians objected and a war followed. Troops from neighboring Arab countries invaded. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians fled or were forced out of their homes in what they call Al-Nakba or the Catastrophe. By the time the fight ended in a ceasefire in the following year, Israel controlled most of the territory. Jordan occupied land which became known as West Bank, and Egypt occupied Gaza. Jerusalem was divided between Israeli forces in the west and Jordanian forces in the east because there was never a peace agreement. Each side blamed the other. There were more wars and fighting in the decades which followed. In another war in 1967, Israel occupied East Jerusalem and West Bank, as well as most of the Syrian Golan Heights, Gaza, and the Egyptian Sinai Peninsula. Most Palestinian refugees and their descendants live in Gaza and West Bank, as well as in neighboring Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon. Neither they nor their descendants have been allowed by Israel to return to their homes. Israel says this would overwhelm the country and threaten its existence as a Jewish state. Israel still occupies the West Bank, and although it pulled out of Gaza, the UN still regards that piece of land as a part of occupied territory. Israel claims the whole of Jerusalem as its capital, while the Palestinian claims East Jerusalem as the capital of a future Palestinian state. The US is one of the only handful of countries to recognize Israel's claim to whole of the city. In past 50 years, Israel has built settlements in these areas where more than 6 lakh Jews now live. Palestinians says these are illegal under international law and are obstacles to peace, but Israel denies this. Now we will see what's happening now. Tensions are often high between Israel and Palestinians living in the East Jerusalem, Gaza, and West Bank. Gaza is ruled by a Palestinian militant group called Hamas, which has fought Israel many times. Israel and Egypt tightly control Gaza's border to stop weapons getting to Hamas. Palestinians in Gaza and West Bank say they are suffering because of Israel's actions and restrictions. Israel say it is only acting to protect itself from Palestinian violence. Things have escalated since the start of Holy Muslim month of Ramadan in mid-April 2021, with the nightly clashes between police and Palestinians. The threatened eviction of some Palestinian families in East Jerusalem has also caused rising anger. What are actually their main problems? There are a number of issues which Israel and Palestinians cannot agree on. These include what should happen to Palestinian refugees, whether Jewish settlements in the occupied West Bank should stay or be removed, whether the two sides should share Jerusalem, and perhaps most tricky of all, whether a Palestinian state should be created alongside Israel. Peace talks have been taking place on and off for more than 25 years, but so far have not solved the conflict.